Welcome to We Need to Name This, where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academia with scholars of color. I'm Ebony Cruz Harvey and my co-host,
Mara Ann Jacobs.
Today's episode is entitled Publishing My First Paper on My Own. We would like to introduce two amazing Black women scholars, Dr. Alaina Neal-Jackson and Dr. Natalie Davis, who will share their experiences with us. But first, we'd like to share a little bit about them. So I'll start with Dr. Neal-Jackson. Dr. Neal-Jackson is a postdoctoral fellow in the School of Education at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where she also received her doctorate in Educational Studies, Foundation and Policy. Her research is centered on race and gender in schooling, as per a larger interest in the health and welfare of Black students particularly, but not singularly, in underserved contexts. More specifically, drawing upon sociological frames and critical race and gender theories, Dr. Neal-Jackson examines how schools, as social institutions, structure Black girls' and women's experiences and opportunities, and in what ways this structuring reproduces social inequalities along race, gendered, and class lines. Her scholarship has been published in the Review of Educational Research, Teachers College Record, the Journal of College Student Development, and the Journal of Educational Administration and History. She is a proud alumni of the Edward Boucher Graduate Honor Society. Prior to completing her doctorate, she received a BA in Rhetoric, Narrative, and Image from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MA in Educational Leadership and Policy from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Thank you so much, Dr. Neal-Jackson, for joining us today.
And I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Davis. Dr. Natalie Davis is an assistant professor in the Department of Early Childhood and Elementary Education and for the Master's MA program in Creative and Innovative Education, MACE, at Georgia State University. Dr. Davis is a former postdoctoral fellow in learning sciences at Northwestern University, where she employed microethnographic and interactional methods to study children's thinking and self-determination in a tinkering after-school program focused on STEAM. Broadly, her research explores the relationship between teaching and learning, cultural ecologies, and the socio-political development of children from non-dominant communities, with emphasis on the educational experiences and freedom dreams of urban-based Black children. Her work also considers the challenges and possibilities of political education in elementary classrooms and the extent to which learning environments nourish children's imaginative spirits. Dr. Davis has collaborated with museums, nonprofit youth-serving organizations, and schools to design curriculum and conduct professional development workshops on topics relating to creativity, science learning, and the enactment of critical pedagogies. She is a recipient of the AERA Division G Distinguished Dissertation and Diamond Dissertation Awards. Her work has been disseminated in academic journals and via public outlets such as Michigan Talk Radio. Dr. Davis received her PhD in Educational Foundations from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and prior to graduate school, she taught third grade in an African-centered school. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Davis. I think I'll start. Yeah. And do you have a preference for how we refer to you in the video?
No preference. I would say Natalie probably, but
okay.
Unless you all are super formal on the other ones.
We've been doing first name basis, but we always ask just in case. Yeah.
Okay. So the first question that we've been starting our interviews with is to learn a little bit more about our guests. So I'd like to ask you to share a little bit more about yourselves, maybe your area of study, your current position, and what brought you to academia to begin with.
So I can go first. So I am currently a postdoc at U of M, and I look at Black girls' education. And that's pretty broad because I like to think about starting with the girls and their needs. And that kind of drives the kinds of work that I do. Overall, I'm really trying to understand how can we make schools a space for them that is without all of the negative inputs, right? All of the control, all of the ways in which they're told to shrink, right? How can we make schools a place where these girls can flourish, right? And can grow and can learn and can experience the opportunities that they are rightfully deserving of. And so I got into academia because in undergrad, I was at Cal and I wanted to teach, right? And I imagined, like I had said that I was going to teach from like a young age, right? Like I was like, I'm going to teach, I'm going to be, I guess I imagined high school, maybe something like that. And I got to Cal and there was no teacher prep program. So I literally had no idea how to become a teacher, right? And so I'm trying to figure out my next steps. And somebody heard me say, I think that I was going to become a teacher. And they were like, oh, what do you think about if you teach at the college level? And for somebody who said they wanted to teach, I mean, that to me, it didn't feel very different. I mean, now I know, I mean, it's not the same thing, but at the time, it didn't feel like a leap. And so from there, I applied to be a part of the McNair Scholars Program. And from there on, it just kind of, now I'm in this, right? Because at that point, you're kind of groomed and primed to, not only get through undergrad, but get, everything else from there, put the goal to be faculty somewhere. So, that's all to say that it probably started with them not having a way for me to become a teacher, and then somebody kind of putting it in my ear that I could teach at a college level. And I was like, sure.
As everyone knows, I'm a faculty member at Georgia State. I'm in the early childhood and elementary education department, but my faculty line is also situated in our master's program of creative and innovative education. The focus of my work really is around children, and in particular, Black children, but Black and Brown children more broadly, around their social and political sense making and learning, and sort of what's the relationship between that sense making and learning and what I refer to as like innovative educational environments that are explicit in their justice oriented commitments. So thinking about schools, after school programs, summer programs, both kind of formal and informal learning environments, but what connects them are them being very explicit in those justice oriented commitments, and also being spaces that are interested in and geared towards supporting the learning of upper elementary children. So that's like in a nutshell the focus of my work. So I feel like there were a few things that happened. There was like how I got into the field of education, and then how I decided I was going to get my PhD in education. And so the education story is a little bit of a long story, but I would say the short piece is that, I went from growing up in Detroit, going to public school in Detroit and being very interested and excited about learning, to transitioning into, I went to Columbia University as an undergrad, and I had a complete new experience around sort of being in an elite educational environment with people who had very affluent people, to be in a predominantly white space, to move from a Black city to a predominantly white space, and then kind of thinking about educational opportunity through that lens. What did it mean for me to be a Black girl from Detroit in that space? And feeling very both constrained and curious about some of the educational experiences that I had, and wanting to think about who better to be able to kind of teach and lead kids like me and support them maybe differently than some of the supports that I had. And that kind of is what broadly led me to education. I was interested in science education at the time. That was something that's near and dear to my heart because I kind of grew up loving science. And so I'm kind of thinking about those intersections between what it meant to be a scientist, what it meant to be a Black kid, kind of growing up and coming of age, and then what it meant to think about science that makes a difference in the world, science that makes a difference in your community, because I felt like that was something that definitely I was never really explicitly taught about, and definitely was not a part of like the curriculum for in terms of like science courses at Columbia. So that was one piece. And then when I was a sophomore, I went back to Michigan, actually at U of M,
to go and do the summer research opportunity program. And I worked with Al Young, who's in the sociology department. And I didn't know at the time was the husband of who ended up being my PhD advisor, but things just come together, how they come together. And I had a really phenomenal experience, and I learned a lot about PhDs. I didn't know anything about them, and I found out people were out here getting free PhDs. And I was like, oh, I will get a free PhD, And there was a lot wrapped up in that, like being from Detroit, what did that mean for me to be able to pursue the highest degree in the land, and to be able to do that while working with people who were from my home, who were from my city. And so the work that I got to do with Al, and I would read interviews, and I'm like, I feel like I know these people. And I had never been able to imagine that I could have a career where I really get to like lift up the experiences and perspectives of people who I felt like I was around every day. So those things kind of came together, and then I shifted into wanting to get a PhD in education. And I guess the rest is history.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really wonderful to hear both of your stories. We've had a lot of guests who shared either, I knew I was going to get a PhD from the time I was 8 years old, to one person when I was in high school told me I should get as much education as I could, or people who, similar to you, Natalie, saying, I wanted to be able to like honor, love, and care for the communities where I'm from. And this was an opportunity for that. Alaina said, kind of maybe some fortuitous like things happen, and there were mentors who encouraged me who were out there. And so it's really inspiring to think about people's many different paths and how they got here. And there's not one single experience that brings us academia. So this episode is about publishing, and you both have published, like, y'all are awesome, in academic and also, non-academic venues. And so our question is like, how much did you know about publishing before you started grad school? And then like, how did you learn about that in your time to be able to do that?
I know I didn't know. I knew nothing before grad school. I mean, I knew there were academic articles, but I didn't really think to like, what journal does it come from, and that this is actually a part of people's like job obligation. Like I didn't understand it in that way at all. And it's funny because I was actually interviewed. There's an article out there floating around by one of my mentors, who's a dear mentor. Like I'm still collaborate with her to this day. But when I was an undergrad, she interviewed me to be a part of, she wrote an article about me, basically. I had no idea I knew I was being interviewed, but I did not understand this was going to be written in something and people would use it in their classes and things like that. And so I know I didn't know much at all. I don't know about Alaina.
Same. I don't think I knew anything about the publishing process before I got here. I mean, in McNair, we went through all of the stages of doing all the research, and then we all ultimately wrote an article that was put in the McNair journal. But before that, I mean, and even in doing that, I don't really think I even knew the significance of like what articles were as a product of your thinking and it's just, I don't know. I mean, you like engage with them as undergrads, but you're not really thinking of all it took to get to this article. And I feel like now I know that these articles are products of what could be, 5 years of like work or more, and so I didn't really know what they were as an artifact of all of these processes, how they are combined with other articles to tell a story of anybody's work or things like that, so I would say I knew nothing about it, outside of kind of that McNair experience, and then engaging with them in classes. I mean, but that's it.
Yeah, I feel like even with grad school, I feel like pretty early in coming into a graduate program or like a doc program like at Michigan, you're going to start to hear conversation and talk around publishing. and it's just, I mean, I think also because you're focusing on things like your CV all of a sudden and developing the categories, and you're like, I have this empty category. Like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? And I think there's something that happens, and I can't say this happens everywhere, but I think that there's something that happens, in some research focused institutions where all of a sudden, doc students, it's like almost like they put their like doc student like blazer on or something, and it becomes this thing where people are sort of talking about how, like, they're talking about their publication, or they're starting to talk about what they're working on, or they're working on an article with their advisor, and it kind of becomes like this, like, I don't know, form of capital, or I don't know, or way of relating or something to people very early. And I think
way too early, when their paper is nothing more than just really unformed idea, right? Like, it's not even a paper, but they've already been trained in some kind of way to talk about the manuscript you're working on, and to always be able to articulate something you're working on in the pipeline. You always got something in the pipeline.
Yeah.
And that does happen like really early, which creates a lot of anxiety for folks who are coming into grad school, who don't even know about publishing, who don't know the kind of importance it takes in your career as you build, right? But yet you're like hearing folks who, they speak with a confidence. A lot of times I think it's a false confidence. I mean, we don't see it, it's a facade, but it is. But they're saying, oh yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, even when they're not doing anything. And you're also hearing like, you need to leave this program with X amount. And you're just like, okay, well, how do I get from not knowing anything to getting 3 or 4 or however many, how do I get these articles published? And it's such a jarring experience, right? Because you don't know how you're going to get from A to B.
Yeah. And so I feel like a lot in terms of learning about it in grad school, I feel like there's some formal things that happen, and then there's just like the stuff you pick up on because you're just in that space. And so like, I feel like once you start taking courses and you start kind of realizing like, oh, some of these people who like are teaching me as faculty are like low-key famous, and I feel like you start realizing like, or they're assigning us things that they wrote, and you're like, oh, and you start to kind of like associate people with like bodies of work, and so I think that kind of starts to teach you a little bit about the publishing process. And then I think just like the way the courses are set up, it gives you like a space where you start to kind of notice journals a little bit more, or you kind of like get a sense of the structure. But some of that is just like, you're just there and it's like your observations. And then I think sometimes you have opportunities, like I remember vividly, like, I don't know if it was in the race and social justice seminar, or it was something that I think Carla was leading, where there was an actual session focused on publishing. And I think that was the most comprehensive and like in-depth like picture that I got into the actual, like, you submit a manuscript and then you get a decision, and then this is what that looks like, and here's a cover letter, and here's the response, and here's after it got like, and I think that gave me a little bit more insight into the nuts and bolts of it, but you still have to translate that into what you might publish, or what you might, and I think that starts to like really pick up probably around like comprehensive, well, here we call it comps, but like our preliminary exams, because people start kind of acting like your paper could be get turned into a publication. You start hearing that language of when you write your empirical paper, it could be a publication. And so I feel like there's a lot of piecing things together, but it's not like something you get a class on typically. So
yeah, I mean, I was going to share that same thing, is that the best experience that I had was when Carla came to this. She had her first draft, she had everything they sent back to her, she had her next draft, and she actually literally walked us through the process. And at that point, that was helpful because you hadn't seen the process, and you don't know if it's just like I turn something in and they just give it back, or like, or what kind of feedback are they providing? Because at that point, I didn't know that everybody talked about it like it was this like it's going to be a terrible process. Like,
Yeah.
be prepared to be
I felt like I
down.
heard that a lot too.
Yeah, so you're nervous, right? I mean, as much as we aren't our work, I put a lot of work into my work, and so I want it to be received well, and it's a reflection of me in a lot of ways. So to hear that, like, you should be, scared that they're just going to tear you apart,
Yeah.
I was like, so what does this look like? And so I felt like through her process of showing us that, yes, they're going to be critical, right? You're going to be pushed in ways that you might not have anticipated, but that it's not just an opportunity where they, and some might, where they just tell you like, you're terrible, this is crap, blah, 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 and so to see how it was kind of also that you did have power in it too, because in trying to think about it being this horrible process where they just, dog you out, but to see that she was also able to have opportunities to kind of speak back to say, this is why I made the decision I made, right? Like, and she didn't have to just take everything that she got, right? I mean, of course, you should look to incorporate the feedback because it's ultimately trying to help you elevate, but you're not powerless. And so to see how she kind of, work through that was helpful.
Yeah, I think that's the best teacher. Like, honestly, like even now, that's what, when I think about my publishing trajectory to date, like I feel like my very early things, I was using that packet of information that I got from that workshop to see how do I like, what words do I use in my cover letter? Or like, how do I like think about approaching like the structure for the reviewer's response? And then I feel like I've kind of collected examples from that, from like working with other mentors and things like that. And then I continue to, but I feel like that was the best teacher, but that again, that may not be something, other people are going to have different experiences with that based off of who their mentors are and what kinds of like early opportunities they may get to be able to collaborate on different projects.
And can we just talk really quickly about how I don't feel that it's productive when you hear folks say, oh, that can be a paper, or that can be a paper, or the idea that everything can be one without telling me what about this are you feeling I can develop that can generate into, like, they just tell you that. And then again, you're left with this heaviness of like, this can be something, I don't know what about it makes or how to even elevate it to that next level. You're kind of then left again with this, like, what do I do, right? And like, how do I elevate it? And so I feel like that's an opportunity there that's often missed, because you just feel all the pressure of like, okay, now I've been told that I have something that can be turned into something, but then I don't have the skills, I don't have just the know-how to actually turn it into something. And that put a lot of pressure on me, I think, in the beginning. I'm like, now I feel like I should be working, but I'm not, because I don't know what to do.
Okay, so you all just gave me so many questions to ask, but you all said some really brilliant things. So I'm going to kind of go down a couple of questions that came up as you all were talking. So the first one for me is, yes, I had the same experience. I went to undergrad, I read all these articles, had no idea where they came from. Poof, they were there. I didn't even know that when I was a doctoral student and to become an assistant professor, like this was a part of the job, like you were saying, Alaina. So that was something completely new to me. And then Natalie, you mentioned also that depending on the type of opportunities you get, there are particular times in your trajectory you'll hear about it, and whether you hear about it and then get those opportunities are like two different things, right? So the first question I had for you all, Natalie, the first question for you is, how early do those opportunities come, right? And where can we get those opportunities? Is it through a research project? Is it working with our advisor? Like, what are some ways as let's say a doctoral student, and let's say this is my first year, when should I be thinking about these things? How can I get early opportunities to write? And then for you, Alaina, how do I have that conversation when somebody says, oh, you should publish that thing? How do I have that conversation with someone to say, what about it? So while Natalie's answering that question, you can be thinking about, what that conversation might look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a few things. So, and some of this is coming from my like faculty, like this is what I tell students when they come to me and they're stressing about, they literally just got their like baby toe on campus and they're already stressing about publications. And I'm like, you need to learn something. you know? And I mean, I feel like even like Rob Jagers, when he was at Michigan, he will always ask, the first thing when you ask about an opportunity, he asks you have any skills, you know? And that's not to say we don't come to grad school with things, but I think when you're a student, like appreciating the opportunity to be a learner and just breathe and try to learn and try, you know, and learn from your mentors, learning your courses, so that because the more you immerse yourself in that, the more ready you will be when those opportunities come up. And then I also tell students, you know, when you're a GRA, that is not a question that is outside an unreasonable question to ask your mentor. If you're working on a research project, of just asking, I mean, of course you want to establish, you know, rapport and start to get acclimated to the work, but just asking them, whether it be for next semester or whether it be 3 years from now, like, are there going to be any publishing, you know, will there be a publishing opportunity for me? Or if I'm interested in publishing, whether it be as a co-author, if you're interested in spearheading something down the line, like what would that look like? What would that require for me? Because that's how you start to kind of parse out some of the politics, because different faculty are going to feel very differently about what that looks like for grad students. There are some faculty who feel like just because you're a grad student on the project and you can literally analyze all the data and you will be at most an acknowledgement on the paper. And as much as I find that to be unethical, but it's important at least to know as a student if that's the case, and that's how the person that you're working with, that's how they think, you know. And there may be some faculty who are like, well, if you're working on this thing, maybe you can be an author, but maybe not. But if you want to do X, Y, and Z, then you're free to, you know, I invite you to be able to develop that into a paper or something like that. And so I think that that's part of it, just asking. I think that's one of the major issues in the academy in general, is that there's this like very hush hush, you know, nature around things and politeness around things. And I'm like, that's not a crazy question in a field where publishing is valued, to ask about publishing or to tell your mentor, I'm interested in working on something independently in my own work, and I want that to be a part of my mentoring plan. So I think that's probably like the most straightforward, is to kind of like actually be vocalizing that that's something you're interested in, so that the people who are there to support you can help you make those linkages and help to push you and have that in mind, because that's not going to be everyone's goals.
I definitely agree with that. I think in my experience, I just had great mentors on a research project. So they're just like, we are going to create something where you will be an author on this thing, like from the jump, you know what I mean? And when I had no idea, like, oh, I need to have this on my resume, I need to have this on my CV, I mean, or this, that, and the third, they were already like, you're working on this project. If you're working on this project, we're going to produce a paper. You're going to be an author on this paper. You know what I mean? So
and I think
not everyone's that straightforward.
Yeah, and I think even beyond authorship, because there's sometimes you can be an author on a paper, but you may not get any insight into the background of the publishing process, because you may write your section, contribute your section, and then the first author, second author does the rest, you know. And so I think that's also like vocalizing. If you know, say you got a chance to be third author or fourth author on something, or fifth or sixth, that's great. And then, but you know, I don't know how I would do that on my own. You know, the paper just magically appeared and my section was in the paper. Then I think that's something to bring up, you know, that I want to be an author on the paper, but can we also, you know, can there be some transparency, or can we share the reviewers' comments, or can I be a part of the meeting so that I can take notes and I can listen to see how you move along in the process? And I think that that's something that grad students, that's not an unreasonable thing to ask. And so they should feel like a sense of permission and being able to do that, because that's important. And that is that's fair game in terms of mentorship at the doctoral level.
I think that's great advice, because that's something I wouldn't have known to ask. And I think that's a great, something great for our audience to understand, that it's important to have those candid conversations in the beginning, even with authorship. You know what I'm saying? No gray areas, because you end up getting shafted in the end.
Yeah.
And then also like saying like, I want to be a part of this, understand the process. So then when there's an opportunity, a call for proposal goes out, you'll have an idea of what that process might look like. So thank you so much, because it makes so much sense. And so Alaina,
yeah,
I wanted
can I
to,
just
did you want
add
to add something to that?
Yeah,
Okay.
is that I think what is not being said, but that's inherent here, is that you should position yourself as a learner, right? And that you don't have to feel like you have to know everything. You don't have to know everything about a certain topic, everything about how to do it. But if you let folks know, like, listen, I am open to learning, I'm open to, trying to understand how this works, then opportunities, I think, will, also be made for you, right? Because then as you're trying to think of like, oh, I have this thing that I'm trying to do. Oh, I remember when, X person came and said, oh, I want to learn. And then you're then being, asked to do this, right? And then I also feel like sometimes we don't ask these things because we think it's going to make us look like less of a colleague. But the idea is that at the end of your program, that's when you have like graduated into being a colleague and a peer, at that point. But in the beginning, the goal is to learn. So you don't need to come in and try to be the first author. You're learning, right? Like take that opportunity and know that like it is great to be third author, sometimes, right? At the point in which you're an early grad student, that is an appropriate place, unless of course you're doing all the first author kind of work, and then you should be the first author. But I think you should take the opportunities to really learn from folks, and not try to come in and act like you know everything or certain things like that, but be open and to say that you want to learn, because I think that creates more opportunities. Right.
And then your classes too, like that is supposed to be helping you develop as a writer, and so again, that's fair game to ask your professors, hey, I did this course, paper, and I'm thinking, I know maybe it's not ready yet, but I'm thinking somewhere down the line, I may want to try to develop it. Do you have, into a publication? Like, do you have any advice or any insight? What do you think? Do you even think it would be a viable candidate for something like that? And also to think about like in your classes, because this is something that's a challenge of graduate school and a challenge of school period, is thinking about how you receive feedback. And so thinking about your coursework and your course papers as you practicing, because if you stress about your professors and feedback and trying to like make sense of that, that is normal and that's a valid feeling. But think of that as preparation for you to be able to respond to reviewer feedback, and people who are not.
Right.
Yeah.
And truth be told, your professor could be your reviewer because it's blind.
Exactly. Very, very likely. Very likely. And so
it could be.
Yeah, I think sometimes it gets compartmentalized, like the publishing thing, as if it's like this separate bucket from your doctoral like experience. And I just think like seeing how the things can feed into one another will help students to feel like you're not necessarily behind. You're not behind in your third year, or you're finishing up your coursework and you haven't done an independent publication, or you don't have any publications, because all of the stuff that you were doing is preparing you to be able to do that well. So that's my.
Yeah, no, I would agree, because to like answer the question is that when you feel like, or you hear this idea that like, oh, this could be a paper, I think you're saying the exact thing that I would do, right? Is ask them, well, in what ways do you see this either making, a new idea come to light? How am I extending theory? How am I ask them to share their thought process, right? Because they shared this because they thought they saw something. You just ask them, what do you see? And they might explain, oh, I've seen in this area of work that we've kind of, kind of mentioned X, Y, Z, right? But in your work, I'm seeing you kind of take this in a different, area. And even though they might not know exactly if it, is something that's new and groundbreaking, at least it provides you with a direction in which to explore, right? Because in any paper, you have to do your, do work, right, to kind of see what's already out there, right? And so even if they're helping you to see a field in which you should be trying to become more aware of, that's helping you to kind of move towards this actually being a thing that you could publish. So in my case, my first one actually, it started out in, I think it started out in a class my first year, I believe, like a little short thing that was maybe like 8 pages. Then I decided to extend that for my exams. And I had, at that point, it turned into maybe something a little bit longer. And somebody who was on the committee was going to have a class that fall about creating a lit preview. And so I was like, maybe I should take this class and learn even more about how it is that I can create a lit preview. And in this class, it was great because she had it such that everything we did, I mean, in terms of how it was structured, how long it was, and all that kind of stuff, was in line with RER's guidelines, right? And so at the end of it, even though you need to do more work, right, you had something that looked like it could be sent in, right? And so in that sense, if you think you have an idea, or if you think that you have something that could be elevated, again, classes can help you to elevate that. And so it's not extra work, right? So it was through that class that I actually it was through 2 classes and the prelims, right, that I took that work and like elevated it. I just kept on elevating it. Not that I turned in the same paper every time, but it was the ideas were there and they kept on growing. And so I would say to really use your classes, right? They don't have to be this thing that you're just doing on the side, but use them as opportunities to truly just move and advance your work forward.
So yeah, you both talked about how we can leverage our courses. Natalie, you mentioned the fact that like we often don't connect like publishing with the coursework we're taking. And now that you said it, it's like, oh yeah, because I remember there was an idea that I had, and over several classes, as Alaina was talking about, I was taking different things I was learning about education and expanding the one idea that I had, and so leveraging classes are so important because it also, when you leverage it for the ideas that you have, you become more invested in the courses themselves because they're going to actually help you expand your ideas. When you're just writing a paper to write a paper in a course, it doesn't really, it's harder to invest in what you're learning because it's like, it's not connecting to your work or what you want to do. Yeah. I don't know, Alaina, were you going to mention something?
Yes, I was just going to say that is the most truest thing that it can probably be said, is that you should use your courses as a way to advance your work, and it truly does invest, more energy and more just everything into your courses. Like absolutely, if you actually use them as an opportunity.
Okay, I'm gonna summarize. I also just want to like shout out a few other things that are along the way. Just a few like highlights, just to kind of for people who are listening, which would be like I heard like mentorship and seeking out advice, and especially both of you had mentioned the transparency of the process, and that Natalie's mentioned like I think the state of mind of viewing classes as preparation. I know you've echoed that also, but I heard also in your response, strategically seeking out opportunities in your courses, not just whatever course you're in, make it work and treat it for you. But you said, well, I wanted to do a lit review on this thing, so I took a class on lit reviews, right? Like, so even thinking strategically, like treating everything like an opportunity. But I also heard, Alaina, from you say like, seeking out those opportunities for yourself from what's available.
Something else that came out of what you all were talking about earlier in the conversation was this idea of a pressure to publish. So Alaina, you were talking about the fact that people were saying, you should publish this. And you're just like, well, what and how? And I should be publishing something or working on something. There seems to be that tremendous pressure, especially as graduate students. So I wanted to know how each of you navigated that pressure. And then also how you actually use your position now as an assistant professor, as a postdoc, to do your writing, to publish. How do you keep up with the pressure to publish, especially as being an assistant professor, or using your postdoc as a time to like really get your portfolio where you want it to be? Like, how do you use that time and how do you deal with that pressure?
Yeah, I think I don't think I've actually felt that much pressure as a graduate student. I don't know, I was just doing a lot of things. I don't think, maybe I could have felt more pressure, but I don't really feel like I felt a whole lot of pressure like at that time. In fact, I feel like I learned more about how people perceive that after the fact, where I was like, oh, well, it worked out. My strategy worked for me, you know? And so, but I really think there's something to be said about just the seeing your work and seeing your scholarship or yourself as a scholar holistically. Because while I might not have been as concerned about publishing, I was concerned about my work being very rich. You know, I was concerned about my work being thorough. I was concerned about like making relationships. I was concerned about kind of following my heart and doing my due diligence by the people that I was studying, you know, that I was collaborating with, the people that I was studying, and forming relationships with people who were in alignment with my values as a researcher, or who I felt like I could learn a lot from to help me develop as a researcher. And so I feel like when it came to like publishing, I just feel like a lot of early opportunities came out of those relationships to do things, and just people kind of maybe not knowing that I didn't have a publishing trajectory, but they knew the quality of my work, you know, and they knew the kind of like energy that I was going to bring to a project. And so I feel like the first opportunity that came to me was like actually through review. I was asked to review a piece in cultural studies of science education by a mentor of mine. And then I put my heart and soul into that, didn't know really what I was doing. And then out of that came a commentary publishing, like writing opportunity that came from that, you know, and it was not something that I sought out. It was just something. And I feel like the next thing that I did something in the Journal Cases for Ed Leadership, came out of a collaborative project, and people liked working with me, and they knew, and it came out of that opportunity. And then that was the next thing. The next thing came out of our co-wrote another commentary piece with Michelle Bellino, but she had experience working with me on my committee. And we knew we had lots of and we formed a relationship. And that is where, so she got an opportunity and she pulled me in to it. And so it was all of those, you know, all of those kinds of things. So, but in terms of just like navigating, like, I don't know, pressure now, I really feel like it kind of comes from that same like perspective around like relationships and being thorough and serious in the quality of your work. Because I used to worry about like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get so many publications? And now I'm like, I need to say no to things. Like, I feel like not only do I have more than enough that I could just write independently, but I'm getting my friends, colleagues, mentors who reach out to me for collaborative opportunities. And so I just feel like when you focus on your work and then these things come to you. Like there's things that like I would not even, your friendships, like Alaina and I just finished writing a book chapter together. Like that is from the strength of our relationship and our friendship over the years. And we will probably write other things together, but these weren't things we planned, you know, that we would have planned for when we were doc students, you know. And so I don't know, I just feel like that's what I tell my students, because I'm certainly, if you do a good dissertation, you'll have data for days. You will have things that you can write, and there will be no shortage of those things. If you form good relationships with good people, they will pull you in and help to create opportunities for you. They will help to lift you up as a junior scholar, you know? And so I just feel like focusing on that. If you love what you do, you're gonna wanna write about it. Like you're gonna feel better about writing and producing scholarship, like along those lines. And so I know people like, you know, that's not the way people talk about it traditionally in the camp, but that's what I tell students. And that is what has worked for me and so I don't know, I don't feel that much, maybe I should, we'll see if I get tenure or not, but I feel like I don't feel a lot of pressure.
You're gonna get tenure.
I write my butt off, you know, but everything I have written pretty much so far has been like heart work, you know, like, and so it makes it And I have a list of other things. I'm like, oh, I can't wait till I need a vacation first, but I can't wait till can get to that piece. Like, and so I don't know, I don't think you'll feel pressure or feel limited if you are really thoroughly immersed in your work. And you know that you have the skills and, the dexterity to be able to produce things.
I would say, I mean, echo what Natalie said, but I feel like I really listen to Carla's advice because she will tell you in a heartbeat. She was like, her strategy, and I really respect Carla. She is a phenomenal thinker, doer, just being, right? She says that her strategy was never one of, I'm going to publish all these articles a year. She says, I'm going to do quality pieces. It might be a little less than what others, but these are going to be quality pieces that are well placed. And that is going to speak for me, who I am as a scholar. And it has, and it worked. And so in some ways, that influences me a lot, because I'm like Natalie said, I'm going to pay attention to the work that I put out being quality, it being well placed, right? And not really just trying to get stuff out there to get stuff out there, because then I feel like then you may have a lot of stuff out there, but then you also provide more opportunities to raise questions about who you are as a scholar and your commitments and things like that, when you're kind of all over the place, where you have a piece that was really strong and then a couple pieces that, that were weak. I think it will create a more diluted scholar identity, in some ways. And so for me, the only kinds I think of, like, I feel the need to do good work. And that's my own person.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I just feel the need that everything that I put out there is solid. And so it's not about the quantity.
Yeah.
But I think in my current role, I've been blessed because I have time. I just have time to do my work. But also, and this might be going off to another topic, but I'm going to share it anyways, is that I also was in a place where I needed to pause on what I was publishing, because like Natalie said, if you do a good dissertation, you should have tons of papers, right? Tons of data to use. But it's also about when stuff will hit, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been in this role this is year 3. And so in thinking about, I need stuff to hit after I get hired for a faculty job. Everything can't hit when I'm a postdoc, because then, it won't count necessarily toward my tenure in the way that I would like for it to, count towards. And so in that sense, still trying to, create the plan for, what comes next and things like that, but also, and to do all the work as well, but to say, I need to be strategic in how these things hit and, when they hit. I need to do enough to get hired, but not too much to where I've used all my good stuff, and now I'm in a place where I'm in year 3 or 4 and I need a grant or I need something in order to even have anything to do. So
I would agree with that, with some strategizing, like around not, having some publications, but maybe not taking something from your qualifying exams, or taking something that's kind of like low hanging fruit, like with your work, that you can be able to speak to your work, but it's not your most, like, I don't know, impactful work necessarily. I do think there's a little bit of strategizing around that, but not something to agonize over, but something to think about. I know I didn't have anything that was really like a super popping like publication that hit until I was in my postdoc, and so, and that worked for me. I still was able to move strategically, through the process. And again, when you publish like good work as a junior, people find you, people send you emails, people contact you, and then you can sometimes get subsequent opportunities that come out of that, because someone is like, oh, wow, like they learn more about you and they want to collaborate, or they see something and they think of you and they want to, and I have something that I'm about to start working on that came out of that opportunity. And so it's just things like that to keep keep in mind. And I see things from like a scarcity mentality, but also to be strategic. And I think that's the balance. But I know the way where I am in my career, I don't think about I got ideas for days, so I don't think about my work from like a scarcity. I'm like, I can always publish, but let me put my heart into quality pieces and not sell myself short in terms of reach for the stars with my work, because then that will kind of position me to be able to make other decisions or to get more exposure if that's something that you care about based on, your career, your career trajectory. So.
And I think that also can be said too for when you try to think about where am I going to submit this article, right? And to this day, my strategy has always been, I'm going to try to put my article in the absolute best place it could possibly go. If they say no, then I go to the next one. Or actually, if they say no, I'm going this way. I'm not going down first, yet. But I think sometimes we talk ourselves into, well, let me go with the lower tiered one because there's a higher chance. But go bigger, like don't go at all. Like you have nothing to lose. I mean, yes, it takes time to submit it and then hear back and things like that. And so in some ways you could lose time, but I think as a grad student, I mean,
it's worth
you have some time. Yeah, it's like it's totally worth it.
But you got to do the work, and you got to have the skills.
You
because you can't take something that's raggedy that you just threw together, and then try to send it to Harvard Ed. Like that's not gonna work.
You have to do your work.
But if you're thoughtful, you get feedback on it. You really, you really took your time and took care to put it together. Now that's different.
Evident. It'll be evident in the things that you submit. So I just think that if more folks had the idea of like, let them tell you no. Don't tell yourself no. Let them tell you no. But we don't do that. We say, oh no, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do that. Because that feeling when, my first one, y'all, ain't no way RER was going to accept my, article. And truth be told, guys, I didn't even know about RER, right? I'm submitting it there because the class told us to structure it. She had told me to structure it according to this, article, what they say. And it wasn't until after I had already submitted it, I spent probably 2 years on that, total, right? With all the feedback and things like that. But it wasn't until after I submitted it that I realized what this journal was. And I don't know right now, but at the time it was like the #1 journal, right? And I'm sitting like, what does that even mean, right? I don't even know what that means. But then after I submitted, I was like, oh man. And I prepared myself to get rejected. I did, because I'm like, oh, this is a terrible process. And how can I, little graduate student me, like, how can this even be accepted, right? And when it came back a revise and resubmit, it was like, oh my God, it was gold. It was like, I couldn't
get surprised.
I was literally like shocked.
I've had that happen
it's
to
not
me.
You don't think that you're good, but you just, I don't know. I just felt that, there was probably a little bit of an imposter thing going on here. It's like, did they do this by mistake? Was it not, but you just, it was a huge thing, but and I don't know if I would have done that on my own. But after that experience, I said, there's no reason why I shouldn't always just try, right? You should just try. And, that just taught me to just not sell myself short.
So I'm going to pass it off to Laura Ann to wrap us up. Thank you, ladies, so much, because you're just a wealth of knowledge.
I feel like we barely scratched the surface. It's so hard to. There's so many dynamics.
This is why we have part 2s.
I'm like I'm trying to think, like, is there anything that you want us to hit up real quick with short, like 1-minute answers?
I guess like the thing that I wrote down a few things that were just so key that really spoke to me when you were speaking. Natalie, you said, focus on your work, right? That's what I want to do, is focus. And then like Alaina, then you said, my goal is just do good work, right? High quality, and well placed, do high quality work. And so I was wondering, kind of as we wrap up, if there are final pieces of advice that you may have for graduate students who have not published yet, but are thinking that they might be at a stage where they want to consider that. What would be like kind of final pieces of advice that you would say to encourage them in that?
I think I would just say read read some of the pieces that impacted you, or that you sort of were really well received by you as a doctoral student, and read them like with intentionality around how did this person, like, how is this structured as a publication, like rhetorically, like what's the format? And so I think going back to some of those pieces that inspired you to even be able to write the thing or have the pieces of the piece that you're working on, and use like publications as models to help you move it, like, narrow down some of the options in terms of structuring and formatting, what you want to do. I think that's a good next step. If you feel like you have something workable, it's like, look at some publications and use that as a template and a guide for what kinds of like tweaks you want to make before you submit it.
Yeah, I think I was going to say also to be strategic in how you craft your work. So even after you know a particular place you're going to have it, look at the kinds of articles that they put out. Look who the editors are, because that might show you their inclinations, right? Like, oh, if this is a qualitative person, maybe they might be more open to, that kind of work. And then also kind of look at what are the kinds of pieces that have been put out there, right? Like, do they tend to be these kind of, longer narrative pieces? Is it more quant work? Is it, because that will help you to know, like, is this the right place to put it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was gonna say too is that I think it helps to read, right? Like, I think everybody's trying to write and get stuff out there, but I always had the advice from others to just, there's no way that you can get around not being like read. Like, you have to be a well-read scholar, and it shows up in the things you write. It shows up in just, I think, the things you create, right? And so, as important as it is to write and to get things out there, I think it's also important to be, to consume as well, and to just know, what's out there.
And don't take things too, this isn't directly, don't take things too personally. Everybody, the scholars are your scholar crushes, they've probably gotten some reviews that would have you clutch your pearls, and so it is not like, don't feel that if you submit something and be so worrisome about what people are going to say about it, because that's kind of the point, is that they're trying to think with you about improving the work. And sometimes you may get something that's not helpful, and if it's not generative, then let it go. But it's just like, don't let the scariness of it, because everyone has that experience, and you'll just like overanalyze and hold yourself back, but give them an opportunity to actually give you something that you can work with to try to strengthen the paper. So I think, don't feel like in a grad student, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get such scary reviews. They're gonna think I don't know what I'm talking about, because I review a lot of papers and I see things that people send papers in a range of states, and it is papers that are far less developed than what I would feel comfortable sending out, and they are still able to publish them sometimes. So I just wouldn't even to think that way, and just, believe in yourself when you feel like you're ready, that's coming from a real place, and push forward.
In my experience, yes, there has been somebody who, I felt like didn't completely understand what I was trying to do, or even make an effort, right, to understand what I was trying to do in the paper. But in every single experience I've had, there has been like one or two people who have literally been like, you go, girl. And of course, I'm doing work on like girls, and there are probably other Black women who are reviewing this, but they have been so, like, I wish I could meet them. There have been some folks who have took the time to say, this is an important piece of work. I want you to feel encouraged. You should continue to do this. And I don't know who they are, but it hasn't been negative. And so it's been on every single paper, every single one I've done. I've gotten such positive feedback. And so I think so just be open to it being a positive experience too, right? That everybody's not going to be a jerk. maybe
Yeah.
one person, but I think you have to have some hope that there are some people out there who, are going to be positive and kind and actually see the feedback as a learning opportunity, something that can actually be helpful as opposed to just something that can, attack and attack and attack.
Yeah, 80 to 90% of all the reviews I've gotten have either been positive or very helpful and important for me pushing the work forward. Like, it's very rare that I just get completely off base. Even if it's harsh, it's coming from the place of, I know this is how you would strengthen the paper. So, I would say that. But yeah, I was saying with the reviewer too, it's like, I feel like the editors, it's always reviewer two that's real grouchy. And then they kind of put it in like a little compliment sandwich and stuff. And so it's like you get reviewer one is like, okay, but here's some pointed feedback. And then reviewer three is the like, looks great,
Right.
just, and then
Reviewer
it's
three don't really be taking a whole lot of time. Reviewer three is the one who read your paper in 10 minutes and was like, here's the overall things that I thought about.
yeah, and it's all good, move forward, you're good to go. And then it's that reviewer too that's grumpy and grouchy, but some of that also can be really helpful, so it just depends.
So I guess the last question is that I have is, we talked about the process generally, but can you like literally tell us like what is the process in terms of submitting, getting feedback, etc.? Because we talked about it like generally and talked about it in these different pieces, but if we can just put it together for our viewers, like what that process looks like.
Once you submit, or once you're preparing to submit.
Yeah, once you're preparing to submit.
Yeah, so once you've identified a journal that you're planning to submit, there's usually some type of specific website, a Scholar One manuscript portal, and you have to create some kind of account. When you submit your article through that account, you've already kind of put in your information. You're going to submit your manuscript, but it has to, more than likely will have to be blinded so that they don't know that it's you. Your name's not in it anywhere in the piece. And you'll submit that. Sometimes they want you to submit your tables separately. That can be a pain, but anyway. And then you would submit your article with a cover letter. There's so many good examples and templates for cover letters, but basically you're writing a letter to the editor that just says, hey, this is the piece I'm submitting. Here's kind of like a abstract and the key findings. This is why I feel like it's a fit to the journal. You might include some like technical information. This is how many words it is. Let them know it's blinded and things like, things of that nature. And, you look forward to a response. And so you submit both of those pieces, and then it kind of goes through a process. And so the first thing is kind of editorial clearance. They make sure, does this even fit in the journal? Did you follow like the general guidelines? And then they'll let you know your paper can get rejected at that point. They call that a desk rejection. And then that could be for a number of reasons. Sometimes they'll tell you why, sometimes they won't. Sometimes it'll be a quick, easy fix. Sometimes it just means that journal's not a good fit. Once they send it out, it gets approved from the editorial office, then it goes out for blind review. So that can take a long time because they have to find people who can review your paper, who agree. They're busy people like all of us. And so it can take them a long time, even if they do agree to get through your paper. But it goes through the blind review process. And then the editor will give you a response once they've had time to get the responses from the reviewers. Then they'll send you something back that summarizes the reviewer's comments and has an editor's letter that is like their summary of what they think is most important about what the reviewer said, and then what the reviewers actually said. And then they'll tell you whether or not you're getting the paper is rejected, but they may welcome you to like resubmit it. They may ask for a major revision. That's most common, that if you get a revision, that is a major revision. Sometimes you'll get a minor revision, or it could just be accepted. That never happens. So I would not expect that in the first round. That doesn't happen. And then you get some time to respond, to look at the feedback, to make changes to the paper, assuming that you got a revise and resubmit, whether it's a minor revision or a major revision. Then you do all that work. You probably over the course of some months, you respond again with another cover letter, but this time you're pointing out what you did to respond to the reviewer and the editor's comments. And that letter can be anywhere from a page to 6 pages, depending on how extensive so keep track of everything you do, however that works for you, because it'll make it a lot easier when it's time to write that letter. Because that is something you're not thinking about, and then it takes you hours to just do that piece. And so then you do that, and then you'll get another round of review and feedback. At that point, it could be another major revision or minor revision. It could be a rejection. It could be an acceptance. And so it kind of goes through as many iterations of that before either the paper gets rejected or the paper gets accepted. But I think that's kind of and then there's a whole proofing process and things like that. But that's sort of, I guess, the more simplified, but there can be some winding, like twists and turns with that. But that's generally how the structure flows, I think.
Thank you. I think that just clarifies, like, okay, what the process is, and that it's an iterative process, and that process might be a long process, and that don't expect that, like, as soon as you send in a paper, like, they're gonna be like, oh, we accepted this, great. You know what I'm saying?
Never.
There's gonna be some
Never.
feedback. You might have a revised resubmit, you might get a rejection, and this is a part of the process. I think that's important for people to hear. And just even on top of that, like, I have like multiple ideas for like more episodes.
Yeah, there's
like, you all talked about being strategic about where you publish your work. So like, what does that being strategic look like? The other thing that came up for me is like publishing inside and outside of academia, right? This process of publishing is super long. What if we want to get our work out there, you know, for folks to really grapple with it at the time that it's like something is happening in education or something is happening in society? There are other ways where you can publish your work, and you can have folks engage with your work while you're working on publishing this in maybe a formal journal. So these are just different things that are really important, I think, for folks to understand that there are different ways to get your work out into the world, and journals are not the only way, or it could be one of the different methods you use. So just like talking to you all is just has my mind like going on like what else people should know about how they can get their work into the world. So I really appreciate you all spending some time, and I could definitely see this being a part 2. So, I mean, you know, if you have time in your schedule, you know what I'm saying, there were some questions we still want to ask, but we want to value your time. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I would be, you know, I'm happy to, you know, these are the things I like to do. You know, it's some stuff I like to do, and it's stuff I don't like to do that much, you know, but I have to do it. And so, like, you know, if you feel like once you all review and there are certain things you want us to like focus on for the next time, because I'm like, there's so much, you know, with the feedback process, the different venues, the how you think about revising, how you think about your body of work, and
you have to like integrate all the reviewers' comments and probably cut words, right?
Yeah,
like
right. And then collaboration, like we didn't get into the politics, authorship, politics, that's a hot mess. Like collaboration and what that looks like on a paper, because that can be a hot mess, you know, and just like timing, like there's so many like things. So if you all have stuff, and you know, I'd be happy to, I'm sure when schedules free up, that I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah,
y'all need a grant. Y'all need a that's a lot of editing. I'm working on a podcast right now with some grad students, and it's audio, but even just seeing how much editing that can be, like, is just like, okay, that's a lot that you all are taking on, but I think it's good work. So
thank you. Well,
I'm down to need anything.
Loved having the two of you, and I think also too, I think your relationship, your friendship comes across very strong in the way you go back and forth. Is just like
y'all are just feeding off each other.
We do this all day.
It's so
too much time together. Me and Natalie, man, she was my road dog, man. It was,
that's a blessing. Could be a whole other episode just on friendships and stuff.
Seriously.
Who would have thought, you know, when I saw, you know, when we met and our paths crossed, and that this many years later, what, 8, 9, 10 years, like
a long time ago
later of being friends, and still being very much being friends and collaborators and co-thinkers and all that stuff too. So
I mean, it's only right because everybody thought we was the same person.
That could be an episode in and of itself. The confusion.
That confusion. I feel like you still might think I'm Natalie sometimes. It's like, wait a minute. But yeah, no.
But yeah, we appreciate you all.
Yes,
And
awesome.
I know
cannot
Dr.
wait.
Jacobs is about to be in the house, very soon. Good luck.
Thank
Good luck.
you.
Deep breath. I know.
This
I
is
felt
exciting.
very
This is exciting.
tense, but I was
Absolutely.
excited, but I felt very tense. And so, yeah, take those deep breaths. I know it's gonna be phenomenal. And
Thank
I know it.
And after I got done with mine, I know I thought to myself, like, how was I so like stressed like about this, right? Like it actually, like, I don't know what I thought I was gonna be. And I had worked myself up so much. And then I got into it and started doing it. And I was like, man, if only I had just not been so,
Okay.
yeah, just so stressed about it. Like I don't know, it's not.
You got
what I
it.
think
Don't
it's gonna be.
overthink
Yeah,
it.
don't overthink
Have
it.
fun. Try
Okay.
to have fun.
As
know what
much
I'm
as you can. This is your defense.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think everybody tries to do something they think is a defense or what a defense should look like, but it's your space,
Okay.
right? And I feel like when I hear from folks, whatever, the things that they think about from mine is not some profoundly scholarly thing I said. It was like, you got up there and you did a rap. I mean, well, yeah, and that was the funnest part. And it was,
Yeah.
I enjoyed it, right? And so it's like that kind of a thing. Like it's your space. So
Okay.
I'm looking forward to see you put you on it. If I
Yeah.
go to that defense and I'm like, who is this? I'm gonna be like, this is crazy. This is crazy.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. It's already, you've already done it. You've already.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank
Right.
you.
Dr. Jacobs. Ooh.
Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, folks, good people.
Head on back. And I hope y'all didn't see. At some point, Avery bust up in here.
Really?
Yeah, she did. I don't know if you saw me like this. I said, no. I said, no. I was pushing her back. No, I'm pushing her against the door. Like, what is she doing? Like, what?
No, I wanted to see my girl. Like,
I know, but this is not the moment. This is not the moment. Anyway. I think I was on mute, so you couldn't hear me say no.
Yeah.
All right, y'all.
all right. Yeah, you all take care.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for We Need to Name This, a series where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academia. Join us for our next episode, should you pursue your PhD at an HBCU or PWI, with Dr. Monique Cherry McDaniel. For more information, visit www.weneedtonamethis.com.